Lynchburg, Tennessee. Early autumn morning of 1906. The sun has not yet risen over the hills, and the air is saturated with raw fog mixed with the thick, sweet smell of fermenting grain. In the center of this landscape stands a small wooden building known to everyone in the area simply as the office. Inside is a man whose name has already become a brand, but whose life is about to turn into a tragic lesson in anatomy and fate. Jasper Newton Daniel. He is 56 years old, although no one can confirm the exact date of his birth due to a fire in the county courthouse. His height is 157 centimeters. He is wearing, as always, a strict knee-length frock coat, a starched shirt, and a planter's hat with wide brims. He looks like the master of life, but at this second, he is a hostage to his own punctuality. Daniel came to work too early. His nephew, Lem Motlow, who handled the finances and possessed a phenomenal memory for numbers, had not yet arrived. In the corner of the room stands a massive steel safe, black, heavy, impregnable. Inside lie important documents and bills that Daniel needs right now. He approaches the metal box. He twists the combination dial. Right, left, right again. No click sounds. The handle does not yield. The mechanism is locked tight, guarding its secrets with the indifference of an inanimate object. Daniel tries again. His fingers, accustomed to checking the quality of grain and oak barrels, slide over the cold metal. The combination of numbers, which Lem knew, escapes him. In the silence of the office, only the heavy breathing of the man who is used to the world obeying his will can be heard. He built a whiskey empire in a state where half the population considered alcohol the devil's brew, and the other half tried to counterfeit it. He survived the Civil War, orphanage, competition from large corporations, and attacks from the temperance movement. But now his opponent is not the law or a competitor, but a piece of iron produced by a company from Cincinnati. Disappointment gives way to rage. This is not just anger. It is a flash of pure, uncontrollable fury, of a perfectionist confronted with chaos. Daniel steps back a pace. He sharply thrusts his left foot forward. The kick lands directly on the heavy steel lock wheel. The sound in the empty room is dry and disgusting. It is not the clang of metal. It is the crack of a breaking big toe bone. Daniel cries out, grabs his foot, and hops on one leg, cursing the safe, Lem Motlow, and the entire morning. He does not yet know that this dull blow became the beginning of the end. At that second, when the phalanx of his toe cracked, gates opened in his body for an invisible killer. Infection. In the era before the discovery of penicillin, there were still 22 years left. Microscopic bacteria that entered the bloodstream through the traumatized tissues began their slow but inexorable march up his leg. This is not the instant death shown in cheap action movies. This is the beginning of a 5-year agony that will devour the Whiskey King piece by piece. First, amputation of the toe, then removal of the foot, then amputation of the leg to the knee. Gangrene will rise higher, turning the great industrialist into an invalid locked in his own mansion, which will become his golden cage and ultimately his tomb. The irony of fate here reaches the scale of an ancient Greek tragedy. The man who produced thousands of gallons of alcohol, the most powerful antiseptic of that time, dies from a banal bloodstream infection because, in a fit of anger, he did not think to immediately treat the wound with his own product. Some medical historians later will argue whether he had a diabetic foot that exacerbated the process, but the fact remains, one kick destroyed the Titan. But to understand the entire monstrous injustice of this finale, we must rewind the tape back. We must see not the aging man kicking the safe, but the boy who had nothing. We must understand where this rage and this ambition came from. Jack Daniel's story is not a story of luck. It is a story of survival in a world that tried to erase him from the face of the earth from birth. We are transported to the mid-19th century, to a world of dust, blood, and smoke. To a world where a little boy runs away from home to find a father not in his biological parent, but in a man whom history will try to forget. Here, in the hills of Tennessee, the real detective story begins. Who really taught Jack to make whiskey? And why was this secret buried for 150 years? The answer lies not in documents, but in oral traditions whispered among former slaves. Forget the label on the bottle. The truth is much harsher, dirtier, and more interesting. This kick to the safe destroyed not only the bone, it launched a chain of events that led to Daniel's huge mansion, the center of his world, being left without an owner, and his legacy passing into the hands of those who did not even bear his surname. We stand on the threshold of investigating a death that lasted 60 months. But first, we must investigate the life. 1850, Lincoln County, Tennessee. A place where religion and whiskey intertwine so closely that sometimes it is impossible to distinguish a sermon from a toast. It is here, in the shadow of the mountains and under the weight of inevitable poverty, that the story of Jasper Newton Daniel begins. His birth was marked by death. His mother, Lucinda, died almost immediately after childbirth, leaving his father, Callaway Daniel, with 10 children on his hands.
Jasper was the youngest, the smallest,
the most vulnerable. In a world where physical strength determined survival on the farm, he seemed doomed to the role of an outsider. His height will stop at just over 1.5 meters, but this physical shortcoming will shape in him the psychology of a giant. He will learn to look at people from below up in such a way that they will feel small. Childhood ended before it began. His father remarried, and relations with his stepmother turned into a Cold War. At an age when modern children learn to read, 6-year-old Jasper makes the first strategic decision of his life. He runs away from home. This was not a childish whim, but a conscious exit from a system that did not suit him. He finds shelter on the farm of Lutheran preacher and store owner Dan Call. Dan Call was a man of paradoxes. On Sundays, he thundered against sins from the pulpit, calling the congregation to righteousness. And on weekdays, he oversaw the production of spirits in the backyard of his farm. For young Daniel, this became the first lesson in the duality of the world. Morality is flexible when it comes to profit. Call saw potential in the small but tenacious boy and allowed him to help at the distillery. However, the story told in advertising booklets for 150 years lied. Dan Call did not teach Jack to make whiskey. The preacher was too busy saving souls and trading. The true architect of the taste, that very Michelangelo of the still, was a man whose name was erased from history textbooks simply because his skin was black. Nathan Nearest Green. An enslaved man who actually ran the entire process on Call's farm. It was Green who took the little white boy under his wing. This was a unique, almost impossible alliance for the South of that time. Slave teacher and free student. In stuffy sheds, amid the smell of yeast and smoke, Green passed on to Daniel the secret that distinguished their product from the cheap moonshine distilled in every other ravine in Tennessee. This secret was called the Lincoln County process, filtration of fresh spirit through a 3-meter layer of pressed sugar maple charcoal. This was economic suicide, The process took up to 10 days. It required felling trees, burning them to a specific state, grinding the charcoal, and slowly, drop by drop, passing the liquid through the filters. Any other producer would say it was madness. Why spend time and money if drunks would buy it anyway? But Nathan Green taught Jack the main principle that would become the foundation of his empire. Quality control is more important than speed. The charcoal removed fusel oils, eliminated harshness, and left that very smooth, oily taste. Jack Daniel understood what others did not. He was not selling the effect of intoxication. He was selling consistency. In 1865, the Civil War ended. Slavery was abolished. The world changed. Nathan Green became a free man, but stayed working with Jack, now as a hired employee, the first black master distiller in America. At the same time, a crisis brewed in Dan Cole's life. The religious community gave the preacher an ultimatum. Either he serves God or mammon. Cole's wife and parishioners demanded closing the Devil's Kitchen. Cole, tired of the pressure, offered Jack to buy the equipment. Daniel was no more than 20 years old. He had no capital, but he had a reputation. He found the money and bought the old stills, becoming the sole owner of the business. And here he makes his second genius move, which set him apart from thousands. The United States government, trying to cover colossal debts after the Civil War, imposed a harsh tax on spirit production. The South's reaction was predictable. Distillers went underground. They hid in forests, shot at tax inspectors, and worked at night so the smoke would not be visible, hence the term moonshine, moonlight. Jack Daniel went in the opposite direction. He put on his best suit, went to town, and officially registered his distillery. This was counterintuitive. Why pay taxes if you can avoid them? Daniel's logic was ironclad. Legality gave him access to markets that illegals could not reach. He could openly advertise his product. He could ship it by railroad. He could put his name on a barrel without fearing confiscation. While competitors played hide-and-seek with the law in the forests, the small man in the big hat built a brand on the main street. In 1884, he buys a plot of land called Cave Spring Hollow. This was not just land. This was a strategic resource. From the limestone cave flowed a spring of water at 13 degrees Celsius. The main feature? The water was completely iron-free. Iron is the enemy of whiskey. It gives the drink a metallic aftertaste and spoils the color. This spring became the heart of the factory. Daniel understood that a unique product requires unique raw materials. He was not just brewing moonshine. He was engaged in high-level chemistry without any education. By the age of 40, Jack Daniel had formed his image. He understood the power of visual perception. Being a bachelor without children, he made himself the character in his own play. The long frock coat visually lengthened his torso. The tall hat added the necessary centimeters of height. He always looked impeccable, even when walking through the production mud. This was a mask behind which hid a tough, calculating mind. He was the voice of God in his small world. Objective, strict, but fair. But behind the facade of success hid emptiness. He had a large family, brothers, sisters, nephews, but no family of his own. He was building an empire, but to whom did he plan to pass it? This question tormented him. He began drawing nephews closer, testing them as he tested whiskey barrels for strength and tightness. It was during this period that his philosophy of old money began to form. He did not want to be a nouveau riche who made a fortune quickly and burned out quickly. He wanted to be an aristocrat of the spirit. he began dreaming of a house. Not just a dwelling, but a palace that would become the physical embodiment of his status. A place where he could receive guests, hold balls that he never had in childhood. A place that would tell the whole world, the runaway boy has returned, and now he owns this town. Opposition from society was growing. The temperance movement was gaining strength. Women from the Christian Temperance Union marched through the streets, smashing barrels. Daniel saw this not as a threat, but as a challenge. He positioned his product not as alcohol for getting drunk, but as a gentleman's elixir.
He raised the price, making it less accessible to the rabble.
This was elitist marketing, 100 years before the term appeared. By the end of the 19th century, Jack Daniel was ready for the next step. He needed a partner who could handle the growing bureaucracy and numbers, while Jack himself dealt with diplomacy and quality. He needed a man who would become his right hand and, possibly, his executioner in the figurative sense. After all, it was precisely the handover of affairs that would lead to that fateful morning at the safe. But for now, he is at the top. He is the Whiskey King, and he is preparing to build his castle. By the end of the 19th century, Jack Daniel's business faced a problem that kills companies more often than bankruptcy. This problem is called scaling. Jack was a genius of product and marketing. He could determine the temperature of the mash just by dipping a finger into it. He could charm any interlocutor in 5 minutes. But he hated paperwork. Accounting, tax declarations, supply logistics. All of this caused him physical repulsion. This was routine that shackled his creative chaos. The empire needed not only a king, but also a prime minister. A man capable of turning charisma into a system. And then, Lem Motlow enters the stage, Jack's nephew. Lem was the complete opposite of his uncle. If Jack was the soul of the company, Lem was its backbone. Tough, unsmiling, obsessed with numbers. He had a memory that worked like a ledger book. He remembered every penny spent on grain 3 years ago. In 1887, seeing that his uncle was drowning in administrative affairs, Lem takes over financial management. This was an ideal marriage of worlds. The Old South in the person of Jack, with his notions of honor, handshakes, and quality, and the New South in the person of Lem, industrial, cynical, oriented toward profit and efficiency. Lem told Jack, "You make the best whiskey in the world, and I'll sell it to the whole world." It was this union that allowed a revolution in packaging. Until the 1890s of the 19th century, whiskey was sold in clay jugs or poured into the buyer's container straight from the barrel. This was faceless. In 1895, a traveling salesman from the glass company Alton in the state of Illinois arrived in Lynchburg. He showed Jack several bottle samples. They were all standard, round. But one stood out. A square bottle. No one bottled whiskey in square glass. It was inconvenient for production, difficult for transportation, strange for the hand. But Jack Daniel saw in it symbolism worth more than convenience. He took the bottle, held it up to the light, and uttered a phrase that became a legend of marketing. A square bottle for an honest man. In English, it is a play on words. A square bottle for a square shooter, for the one who plays by the rules, who is straight and honest. Lem Motlow probably calculated how many such bottles would fit in a crate for railroad transport. The square shape saved space. Jack's aesthetics and Lem's pragmatism aligned once again. Thus was born a design icon that would outlive them both. But Jack's ambitions extended beyond Tennessee. He wanted world recognition. In 1904, the World's Fair opened in St. Louis. This was an event of planetary scale, 20 million visitors, demonstration of the latest achievements, electricity, automobiles, radio, and, of course, the contest for the world's best whiskeys. Jack Daniel decided to participate. It looked like suicide. A small distillery from the backwoods against giants from Scotland and Kentucky, whose brands had existed for centuries. Jack arrived in St. Louis in person. Imagine the picture. Among industrialists in modern gray suits walks a shorty in an old-fashioned long frock coat and wide hat. He looked like a fossil. They laughed at him. But the tasting was blind.
The judges saw neither the frock coat nor the hat, nor the provincial origin. They tasted only the liquid. 4 hours of tense waiting. When the jury chairman announced the winner, the hall fell silent. The gold medal for the world's best whiskey went to Old No. 7 from Tennessee. This was a triumph. Jack returned to Lynchburg not just as a businessman, but as a national hero. Orders poured in from all over the world. Lem Motlow could barely keep up hiring people and expanding warehouses. Money flowed like a river. Real, big money, which Orphan Jasper had never even dared to dream of. And here a psychological shift occurs. When you have money, fame, and recognition, you need a stage to display it. Jack Daniel, the eternal bachelor living for work, suddenly realizes that he has nowhere to receive guests of the level that now matches his status. He needs a house. But not just housing. He needed a symbol. He starts a project that was to become the crown of his personal life, the construction of a large mansion in the center of Lynchburg. The mansion was built quickly, a 2-story white building in the Victorian style. Huge windows, verandas encircling the house like embraces. Jack personally chose every detail. He wanted the house to breathe. But while the builders erected the walls of his dream, clouds were gathering in the distillery office. Lem Motlow was becoming increasingly indispensable. He had monopolized all financial flows. He alone knew the safe codes. He alone understood the complex supply schemes. Jack was becoming dependent on his nephew. This was the classic founder's trap. You create a system that becomes more complex than you. You hire people who are smarter than you in the details. And one day, you come to your own office and realize that you no longer control the situation. 1905. Jack is at the peak. He is rich, famous. His house is almost ready. He plans grand receptions. He orders furniture from Europe. He buys a piano, although he does not play himself. He creates scenery for a happy old age. No one could have guessed that this marriage of worlds, Jack's creative chaos and Lem's rigid order, would crack in the most unexpected place. Lem, the guardian of order, would become the unwitting cause of chaos. And the order locked in the steel safe would demand a bloody sacrifice for the attempt to violate it. We are approaching the fateful 1906. The mansion stands, gleaming with fresh paint. The gold medal hangs in a frame. The empire runs like clockwork. But the clock has already begun counting down. Jack Daniel is used to the world bending to him. He is used to wood turning into charcoal, water into whiskey, and a name into gold. He forgot that there are things that cannot be bent. For example, the tempered steel of the lock. We approach the mansion that became the physical embodiment of Jack Daniel's soul. This is not just a building of wood and brick. This is a psychological self-portrait of a man who spent his whole life trying to compensate for his small stature with a gigantic footprint in history. The house stands in Lynchburg, like a white liner amid the green ocean of Tennessee hills. Victorian style, 2 stories, complex roof, and a veranda encircling the building on all sides. If the distillery was his kitchen, where he cooked success, then this house was his throne room, where he planned to enjoy the triumph. The first thing that catches the eye is the contrast. Around, dusty roads, wooden shacks of farmers, soot-covered production walls, and here, dazzling whiteness requiring constant care. Painting such a house in the early 20th century cost as much as a distillery worker's annual earnings. This was a signal. Here lives not just a rich man, here lives a man who subjugated the chaos of nature. Let us enter mentally inside. We ascend the wide steps of the veranda. This space is a gateway between the outside world and the inner sanctuary. Here, Jack, sitting in a wicker chair, observed the town. This was the position of an observer, a patriarch. From this point, he seemed taller than everyone passing by on the street. The architecture worked for his status. The door opens, and we enter the hall. The first sensation is the smell. Not whiskey. Here it smelled of beeswax with which the parquet was polished, expensive tobacco, and heavy velvet. The interior was overloaded with details, as the Victorians loved. Heavy curtains blocking the harsh southern sun. Mahogany furniture, massive, eternal. Every chair leg, every armchair armrest was personally chosen by Jack. He created scenery for the life he never had in childhood. The center of attraction was the music room. And here lies the deepest psychological paradox of the owner. In the room stood a piano, lay guitars, banjos, and mandolins. A collection of instruments worthy of a small orchestra. But here is the fact. Jack Daniel himself could hardly play. He was not a musician. Why then did he buy all this? The answer is simple and tragic. The instruments were intended for guests. He wanted his house to be filled with sounds, laughter, and the life of other people. He rented others' happiness, providing a venue for it. He hired local bands, invited nieces and nephews, held evenings where the music did not stop until dawn. He was the producer of fun, remaining a spectator. He stood aside in his impeccable frock coat, watching as others lived the life he dreamed of. The house was designed as the perfect hospitality machine. The dining room could seat dozens of people. The kitchen operated on an industrial scale, although Jack himself ate like a bird. It is known that he often held lunches for the entire community. This was a form of power, to feed others. When you feed a person, he becomes your debtor. This is an ancient, almost feudal instinct. Jack Daniel was not a tyrant. He was a benevolent king, but a king who wanted his generosity to be seen by all. Let us go up to the second floor. The staircase is wide, creaky, designed for a solemn descent. Upstairs, the atmosphere changes. If the first floor is a stage for the public, then the second is the backdrop of solitude. Jack's bedroom. Here, decorativeness gives way to functionalism. A simple bed, a wardrobe for his numerous frock coats, a window overlooking the distillery. Even in his sleep, he did not want to lose visual contact with his creation. It was in this room, in the silence that the parties downstairs could not drown out, that Jack Daniel remained alone with his demons. Absence of a wife, absence of direct heirs, fear that after his death the empire would fall apart. The walls of this bedroom absorbed not the laughter of guests, but the owner's sleepless nights. This house was built at the peak of power in 1905 or 1906. It was meant to become a monument to eternity. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. The mansion, created for balls and receptions, would soon turn into a hospital. Spacious corridors intended for dancing would become paths for doctors and nurses, and the smell of expensive tobacco would be replaced by the nauseating odor of iodoform and rotting flesh. The house's architecture would play its sinister role. The wide staircase of which Jack was so proud would become an insurmountable obstacle for him when gangrene began taking his leg, centimeter by centimeter. Spacious rooms would become too large for a man confined to a wheelchair. Grandeur would turn into a prison. But for now, in this last peaceful summer before the catastrophe, the house shines with lights. Ragtime music pours from the open windows. Lem Motlow discusses business with partners in the smoking room. Ladies in long dresses laugh on the veranda. Jack Daniel walks among the guests, offering his famous number 7. He smiles. He thinks he has built paradise on earth. He does not know that in his office, a couple of miles away, the heavy steel safe is already waiting for him. The safe is not invited to the party. The safe stands in the darkness, cold and indifferent. It is the only object in Daniel's empire that does not obey the master. And this contrast, the living, warm, singing house and the dead, silent metal, creates tension that makes it impossible to breathe. We leave Jack on the veranda of his dream. He watches the sunset. Keys jingle in his pocket, but he forgot that the safe code is not on the keychain, but in Lem's head. Tomorrow morning, he will decide to go to the office early. Tomorrow morning, the architecture of his life will collapse from one wrong foot movement. We return to that second when the echo of the blow against the metal faded in the office walls. Jack Daniel stands on one leg. The pain is throbbing, sharp, but for a man of his caliber, tolerable. And here the main mistake is made, which will turn the injury into a tragedy. He does not call a doctor. He does not rinse the wound with whiskey, as the beautiful legend claims. He simply puts his boot back on the swollen foot and limps home. This was the act of a 19th century man. Stoicism, ignoring pain as proof of masculinity. He thought the body would handle it itself, as it had handled hunger in childhood and fatigue at production. But he underestimated the enemy. The enemy was invisible and merciless. Bacteria had already begun their colonization. Soon, Lem Motlow arrives at the office. The nephew enters, sees his uncle in a bad mood, approaches the safe, and opens it in 5 seconds. A click, turn of the handle, the door swings open. This scene is the quintessence of irony. The problem for which Jack sacrificed his health was solved by simple knowledge of the combination. If Jack had waited 10 minutes, if he had drunk coffee, if he had tamed his pride and admitted that he cannot control everything. But history knows no subjunctive mood. The safe is open, but the price of entry has already been paid. Days turn into weeks. Pain in the toe is replaced by numbness, then by a strange change in skin color. It becomes first purple, then black. Gangrene. This word sounded like a sentence. Tissues died right on a living person. The smell of decay began to haunt Jack. Imagine this horror. The creator of the world's most aromatic spirits, now himself, is the source of the smell of death. The doctors gave the verdict: amputation. First, they took the toe. Jack hoped that would be enough. He was still trying to run the business, sitting in his office in the mansion. But his world was rapidly shrinking. From trips across the country to the town, from the town to home, from home to the chair. The infection did not stop. It crept upward like mercury in a thermometer.
The second operation was inevitable. They amputated his foot. Then, the leg to the knee. The man who built his empire on constant movement, on personal control of every stage, found himself bedridden. And here unfolds the real human drama. The mansion, built for balls and music, plunged into silence. Nieces and nephews, whom he loved so much to gather around him, now came not to have fun, but to keep vigil at the bedside of the dying. Looks changed. Instead of admiration, pity and fear were now read in their eyes. For a proud man, this was worse than physical pain. Lem Motlow, during this period, becomes the de facto head of the company. And here arises a complex moral layer. Lem is not a usurper. He is the savior of the business. While Jack fought the fever, Lem fought the market and competitors. He continued expanding production, closing deals. He acted on Jack's behalf, but now without his participation. The viewer must feel this duality. On one hand, we see the tragedy of the uncle who is fading and losing influence. On the other hand, we see the efficiency of the nephew who proves that the empire is bigger than its creator. This is a cruel business lesson. A company is a machine, and if the driver falls out of the cab, someone else must grab the wheel, or everyone crashes. Lem grabbed it. Jack Daniel lay in his bedroom on the second floor. The window overlooked the distillery. He could see smoke from the chimneys. He could hear the whistles of locomotives carrying away his whiskey. Life boiled down there. And here, upstairs, time stood still. He became a ghost in his own house while still alive. His character began to change. From a charismatic leader, he turned into an irritable, pain-tormented old man. Constant dressings, the smell of medicines, helplessness. It is said that in moments of clarity, he asked to bring him sales reports. He clung to the numbers as the only proof that he still existed, that he was still important. But was he a hero in the full sense of the word? His stubbornness, which helped create the brand, became the cause of his death. His unwillingness to delegate, the attempt to open the safe himself, led to the collapse. We see a man who became a victim of his greatest virtue, the desire to do everything himself. In 1910, a year before his death, Jack rewrote his will. He had no children. All his estate, the entire gigantic money-making machine, was to pass to his nephews. Lem Motlow receives control of the company. This was an act of humility. Jack acknowledged defeat to nature and to time. He passed the crown while still alive because he understood a dead king cannot rule. But even in this state, he remained a symbol. People in the town whispered about poor Mr. Jack's leg. The myth began forming even before his last breath. The story of the safe was passed from mouth to mouth, growing details. People sought meaning in this absurdity. Why did God allow this? Perhaps it was punishment for trading in the devil's brew, or, on the contrary, a test for a great spirit. The 5th year of agony was coming to an end. The body was exhausted from the fight with sepsis. The mansion, his white dream, became his mausoleum. Servants tiptoed around. The curtains were drawn. The man who wanted to fill this house with light and music now needed only the darkness and silence of morphine. October 10th, 1911. Lincoln County freezes. In the bedroom on the second floor of the White Mansion, Jasper Newton Daniels' breathing finally stops. The 5-year war with his own body is lost. Sepsis, started from a microscopic crack in the bone, completes its work, shutting down organs one by one. Silence hangs in the room, which even the hum of the distant distillery cannot break. The king is dead. He was 61 years old. But Jack Daniels' death is not just the end of biological life. It is the moment of a perfect historical storm. Fate prepared for him the last, most cruel test, which he observed from his deathbed. A year before his death, in 1910, the state of Tennessee passes a law on the complete prohibition of alcohol production. This happened 10 years before the nationwide prohibition in the United States. Imagine the scale of this tragedy. The man who devoted his life to legalizing his craft, who paid taxes, built churches and schools with his own money, dies in the status of a criminal. He sees his business, his pride, declared outside the law. He departs into oblivion with the thought that his empire is destroyed. And here the plot undergoes a transformation. If until this moment it was the story of the creator, now it becomes the story of the defender. Lem Motlow fully takes the stage. Now he is not just the accountant nephew. He is the general of an army that found itself surrounded. On the day of Jack's funeral, when thousands of people, black and white, rich and poor, came to the mansion to bid farewell to the little giant, Lem stood by the coffin not only with grief, but with cold calculation in his eyes. He understood. The time of romance is over. The time of war for survival begins. It is at this moment that the role of that damned safe is rethought. Before, it was a tool of death. Now, it becomes an ark of salvation. Inside the safe, which Lem opened with such ease, lay not only money. There lay patents, legal documents, and, most importantly, the recipe formula. Lem Motlow understood that buildings could be burned, equipment confiscated, and the mansion emptied. But as long as he has the paper with his uncle's signature and the knowledge of the process, the idea cannot be killed. The crisis forces Lem to do the impossible. He does not close the business as the state law demanded. He relocates production. First to St. Louis, Missouri, then to Birmingham, Alabama. He saves the yeast culture, a living organism that Jack had cultivated for decades. He saves the barrels. He begins a legal battle in the state Supreme Court that will last years. Meanwhile, the mansion in Lynchburg turns into a ghost. The house, built as a symbol of living success, instantly becomes a monument. Furniture chosen by Jack is covered with dusty covers. The piano, on which no one played, falls silent forever. The house stands empty, like a beautiful shell from which the soul has departed. Local residents begin to avoid it, telling legends that at night the tapping of the lame master's cane can be heard. But the true transcendence of this story lies elsewhere. Jack's death separated the man from the brand. While Jasper was alive, Jack Daniels whiskey was perceived as the product of a specific neighbor whom everyone knew. After his death, the name on the bottle began to live its own life. It turned into a symbol of the old, real South, which was disappearing under the pressure of industrialization and prohibitions. Lem Motlow makes a brilliant move. He does not change the name. He does not remove his uncle's name. On the contrary, he makes Jack's figure mythological. He begins to cultivate the image of the old gentleman with a mustache, turning a real person into an icon. The harsher the law pressed,
the more people wanted to touch this legend. Forbidden fruit is sweet, and if this fruit is also shrouded in the tragic story of the great master's death, it becomes priceless. In these dark years, when production in Lynchburg stopped and the cave with the spring overgrew with grass, Lem Motlow reevaluated the very concept of wealth. For Jack, wealth was the mansion, gold, recognition. For Lem, wealth became legacy. He understood that his mission was not to earn, but to preserve. He spent millions on lawsuits, not for profit, there was no profit, but for principle. He fought for the right to bring his uncle's name home. This was a transition from egoism, my house, my success, to service, our history, our honor. If Jack had not kicked the safe, if he had lived another 20 years, perhaps he would have closed the distillery himself under pressure from the authorities, tired of the struggle. But his early, agonizing death became a catalyst that made the heirs fight with double fury. Jack's blood became the cement for the foundation of the future global corporation. The mansion remained standing on the hill, reminding everyone of the fragility of human plans. It became the physical embodiment of the lesson. You can build a palace, but you cannot buy time. You can create the most protected system, but it will destroy you if you lose self-control. The story approaches its logical conclusion. We saw the rise, triumph, fatal mistake, and death. But one last question remains, which makes this tragedy relevant for us today. What really remains from Jack Daniel? Bones in the grave? An empty house? Or something that cannot be touched with hands, but makes millions of people around the world recognize this black and white label? Ahead is the finale, the moment when we understand why this kick with the foot was not just an accident, but a necessary element in the birth of immortality. 27 years have passed since Jack Daniel's death, and the world has changed beyond recognition. It is 1938. In this time, the United States experienced World War I, the Roaring Twenties, and the Great Depression. But the most massive shock for the alcohol industry was Prohibition, which operated across the country from 1920 to 1933. It was during this period that the true resilience of Jack's legacy was revealed, embodied in his nephew, Lem Motlow. Lem did not just preserve the business, he became its savior. After the repeal of the federal alcohol ban in 1933, Lem Motlow, no longer just an accountant, but an experienced politician, runs for the Tennessee State Senate. His sole and main goal was to change the absurd state law that continued to prohibit alcohol production even after the end of the nationwide prohibition. He spent years in courts, spent huge sums on lobbying and personal campaigning. In 1938, he achieves victory. The state law is changed, and distilleries are again allowed to operate in Lynchburg. But here the story of Jack Daniel presents us with the last, most bitter, and perhaps most characteristic paradox. Moore County, where the famous distillery is located, remains a dry county to this day. This means that you can produce millions of gallons of whiskey there. You can ship it to 170 countries around the world, earning billions of dollars for the company. But you cannot buy even one bottle of this drink in a local store or bar in Lynchburg. This absurd rule, still in effect today, serves as a kind of eternal monument to the duality of the American South, between religious righteousness and pragmatic trade. Jack, the eternal strategist who legalized his business to gain an advantage, would now be forced to reconcile with this legal trap. And what about that ill-fated safe? Its fate is no less symbolic than its role in Jack's life. It was not melted down, not locked away in the company's archives. Today, this massive black safe from Cincinnati stands in the exact same place, in Jack's old wooden office, which has now been turned into a museum. Every year, hundreds of thousands of tourists from around the world pass by it. They look at the heavy steel body, at that very lock wheel that caused the fatal injury. Guides tell this story as a grim anecdotal sketch, part of the colorful biography. But if you think about it, this is one of the most eerie, almost surreal memorials in business history. It is a murder weapon on display, immortalized as a relic. People take selfies with Jack Daniel's killer, unaware of the full depth of the tragedy, the weight of the 5-year agony that began with this silent, uncontrollable piece of iron. The safe stands there as a silent witness to the futility of human ambitions in the face of one's own impulsiveness and biological fragility. But Jack Daniel's legacy underwent yet another, perhaps the most important and long-awaited transformation in our time, more than 150 years after his birth. In 2016, after decades of research and efforts by historians, the Jack Daniel's Company officially acknowledged the role of Nathan "Nearest" Green, the name of the man who was actually Jack's teacher, the first black master distiller in the United States, returned from oblivion. This act of historical justice changed the entire brand mythology. Now on tours in Lynchburg, they tell not only about the little man in the big hat, but also about the genius African-American, a former slave, who put the craft in his hands and taught him the subtleties of the Lincoln County process. The story has come full circle. Forgotten voices were heard, and justice, albeit 150 years late, was restored, making the brand not just a symbol of the past, but an example of reinterpreting history. Jack's mansion, that very lost palace of his hopes and ambitions, today is more of a historical artifact than a living home. It stands as a reminder that personal happiness and professional success are often different currencies, and the exchange rate between them can be predatory. Jack built a house for a large, cheerful family that he did not have, and died in it from an injury sustained at work, which had replaced that family for him. This is the place where the great visionary was doomed to solitary agony, surrounded by wealth, but deprived of the main thing. What does this story teach us today? We live in an era of the cult of productivity, instant results, and unlimited access to information. We want the safe to open right now, at the first demand. We kick our gadgets when the internet lags. We snap at loved ones when our plans are disrupted. Jack Daniel's death is a cruel reminder of the price of impatience and loss of self-control. 1 second of lost control, one uncontrollable emotional outburst, cost him 20 years of life, and ultimately served as the catalyst for his agonizing demise. One emotional impulse destroyed a brilliant mind. This is a fundamental lesson that the hardest things in the world, be it the steal of the safe, inexorable circumstances, or the irreversible flow of time, do not yield to brute force. They yield only to knowledge, patience, and a strategic approach. If Jack had waited for Lem, if he had tamed his pride, he would undoubtedly have lived a long life, enjoying the fruits of his labors. But then, perhaps, we would not have this legend, this tragic myth that gives Jack Daniel's whiskey such profound, almost sacred significance. Jack Daniel's story is not just a story about whiskey, about alcohol production. It is a deep story about ambition that devours its creator. It is an archetypal plot. Icarus, who flew too close to the sun, or, in this case, struck the iron too hard, opening the way not to treasures, but to death. It is a story that resonates with everyone who has ever struggled with their own temperament. Today, when you see the square bottle with the black and white label, you see not just a drink, you see a multi-layered monument. The black background of the label, according to one version, was chosen by Lem Motlow precisely as a sign of mourning for his uncle, as a tribute to memory. Every bottle is an obituary. Every drop is a reminder that great empires are built on the bones of their founders, and that the personal price for greatness can be unimaginably high. Jasper Newton Daniel left us not just a brand and a product, he left us a mirror. Gazing into the story of his absurd, agonizing death, we see our own fears. The fear of losing control over our own life. The fear of being left alone in a big house. The fear that the work of a lifetime will outlive us, but will no longer belong to us. He was just 1.5 meters tall, but his shadow covered the entire planet. He died from a microscopic infection in his toe, but his name became immortal. And in this final chord sounds the main, cruel truth of the true crime and historical drama genre. The victim is always more important than the perpetrator. The safe remained just an old box, a soulless piece of metal, a tool. But Jack Daniel became a spirit that lives in every bar from Tokyo to New York. His story is an eternal reminder that grand undertakings are often paid for with the highest price, the life of the creator himself. Perhaps, on that fateful morning of 1906, he did not just break his toe. Perhaps with that kick of the foot, he kicked open the door to eternity. Only the entry price turned out to be too high, and the path to immortality lay through unbearable suffering.